Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a world where comfort is a luxury you don't fall the sum, into the sun, off, like something stale that never quite leaves, and before you even open your eyes properly, you realize something important. There's no bathroom, no hallway, no plumbing, and yeah, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know your location and local time down in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up slowly. The room is quiet, but not peaceful. It has a kind of heaviness to it, like the air has been sitting still for too long. There's a faint chill, the kind that clings to your skin rather than refreshing it. You glance around expecting something familiar, maybe a door leading to a bathroom, a sink, anything. There's nothing. Just a small wooden table, a narrow bed, and in the corner, something you don't quite want to look at too closely. You pause, because your body has already noticed, before your mind fully catches up, that subtle, uncomfortable pressure, the kind that gently reminds you of your morning routine. Except here, there is no routine. You shift your weight, trying to ignore it at first. Maybe it will pass. Maybe it will just act yourself. But your body doesn't work like that. It's patient, persistent. It doesn't care where you are, it just does what it does. And now you're starting to realize the problem. Because in this world, there are no modern toilets, no flushing systems, no privacy, nothing designed to make this part of life easy, clean, or even slightly comfortable. You glance again toward that corner. This time, you look properly. It's a container. Simple, unremarkable. But its purpose is immediately clear. A chamber pot. In many pre-modern societies, including medieval Europe, chamber pots were a standard part of daily life. They were kept in bedrooms, used whenever needed, and emptied later, sometimes carefully, sometimes not so much. Historians still argue how consistently they were used across different households, but one thing is certain, they were everywhere. And now, so is your problem. You sit there for a moment doing absolutely nothing, because your brain is trying to process something that feels completely unnatural. Using the bathroom, right here, in the same space where you sleep, where you eat, where you exist, it feels wrong. But your body doesn't care about what feels right. The pressure builds, just slightly, not urgent yet. But getting there, you exhale slowly, running a hand over your face, trying to think. Maybe there's somewhere else. You stand up, your movements cautious, and take a few steps across the room. The floor creaks softly beneath you. You check the door, heavy, wooden, slightly uneven. You open it. A narrow hallway greets you. Dim light. Cold stone. No signs. No directions. No clear, this way to the bathroom. Just silence and distance. You hesitate, because stepping out means exposure. No guarantee of privacy. No guarantee of anything really. A strange thought crosses your mind, one that feels almost out of place. In some medieval towns, people would simply use nearby streets, alleys, or designated areas outside, often without much separation or sanitation. It wasn't considered unusual, just normal. Historians still argue whether this was widely accepted or more of a last resort, but either way, it tells you something important. Standards were different, very different. You step back into the room, close the door slowly, and now you're left with a choice: stay uncomfortable or adapt. You look again at the chamber pot. It hasn't moved, it hasn't changed. But somehow, it feels more present now, more relevant. You walk toward it slowly, your steps hesitant, your mind still resisting the idea. Because this isn't just about necessity. It's about breaking a habit, a lifelong expectation of comfort, cleanliness, privacy. All of that disappears here, and what replaces it is something much simpler, much more direct. You pause just short of it, your body still unsure, your mind still catching up, because this is your first real moment of adjustment. Your first realization that this world doesn't bend to your expectations. You have to bend to it. The pressure builds again, slightly stronger now. Not overwhelming, but enough. Enough to make the decision for you. You glance toward the door once more, then back at the room. Empty, quiet, still. You take a slow breath, then another. Because this isn't just about what you're about to do. It's about what it means. This is the first step into a completely different way of living. One where convenience doesn't exist. where comfort isn't guaranteed, where even the most basic human needs become complicated. You lower yourself carefully, your movements slow, deliberate, your mind trying not to overthink what's happening, because thinking too much makes it harder, and right now, you just need to get through it. The room remains silent. The air doesn't change. The world outside doesn't react. Because here, this is normal. This is everyday life. And as you sit there adjusting to something you never thought you'd have to think about, you begin to understand something important. Survival isn't just about big dangers. It's about small, constant challenges, the kind that don't seem like much at first, until you realize you have to face them every single day. And this is just the beginning. You don't rush. Not because you don't want to, but because everything about this moment feels slower than it should, even after you're done, even after you've stepped away and tried not to think too much about it. The reality lingers. The room hasn't changed. The air hasn't changed. But your awareness of it has. You glance again at the corner, then quickly look away, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Because already, your mind is trying to separate spaces. This corner, for that. The bed, for rest. The table, for anything else. But the truth is, in a room like this, those boundaries are thin, almost imaginary. You move toward the small window, if it can even be called that. It's more like a narrow slit in the wall, letting in a faint line of pale light. You lean closer, hoping for fresh air, for something that feels different. There's a hint of it. Cooler, but not enough to change the room. You step back, and that's when your body reminds you of something else. That this isn't a one-time problem. It's not something you solve once and move on from. This is a daily reality, a repeated need. And now, you have to figure out what people actually did. You glance toward the door again, then open it slowly, stepping into the narrow hallway. The stone beneath your feet feels colder here, more solid. The air shifts slightly, carrying faint traces of movement from somewhere beyond. You listen. No voices, no footsteps. Just that quiet, distant hum of a place that exists without urgency. You begin to walk, carefully, because you don't know where you're going, or what you'll find. The hallway bends slightly, leading you toward a wider space. As you step into it, the air is cold and tough, cleaner, but more mixed, carrying layers of different smells, some faint, some not so faint. You pause, because now, it's clearer. This isn't just your room, this is everywhere. In many medieval towns and homes, there was no single designated place for waste. Instead, people used whatever was available: chamber pots indoors, designated corners, or simply outdoor spaces when possible. Historians still argue how organized these systems were, but most agree they were inconsistent at best. You step forward again, moving slowly through the space, your senses adjusting. There's an open doorway ahead. You approach it cautiously, then stop just short of entering, because what you see is different. It's not a private room, not enclosed, just a space, partially open, with a few simple wooden structures lined along one side. Basic, unpolished, functional. You don't need an explanation. The purpose is obvious. A shared area. A place where multiple people would come, use, and leave. No doors. No real separation. Just presence. You hesitate, because this crosses another boundary. Not just comfort, but privacy. You step back slightly, your mind reacting before your body does, because this feels even more unfamiliar than the chamber pot. At least that was private, contained. This is not. A strange detail surfaces in your thoughts, something oddly specific. In some historical records, communal latrines were used by multiple people at once, sometimes with little to no division between them. Conversation could even happen there, casual, unremarkable. Historians still argue how common this behavior was, but the idea alone tells you something important. Expectations were different. Very different. You take another step back, because right now you don't need to use it, but the fact that it exists changes your understanding. This is how things are done here, not occasionally, not in emergencies, but regularly. You turn away slowly, heading back toward your room, your footsteps quieter now, more deliberate, because your mind is processing something deeper. This isn't just about where you go, it's about how you live, how you adjust your expectations, how you redefine what feels normal. You step back into your room and close the door gently behind you. The space feels smaller now, more contained, but also more manageable, because at least here you have some control, some privacy, even if it's limited. You sit down again, carefully, your body settling into the same position as before. The air still carries that faint, lingering presence. But now, you understand it better. You're not surprised by it. You expect it, and that expectation makes it easier to handle. You glance once more toward the corner, then away, because you don't need to look at it anymore. You know it's there, and that's enough. You take a slow breath, then another, letting your body relax, your thoughts steady, because this is only the second step, and already things feel different, more real, more grounded, less abstract. And as you sit there, adjusting not just to the physical space, but to the idea of living within it, you begin to understand something important. Survival here isn't just about what you do, it's about what you accept. The small changes, the quiet compromises, the things you stop questioning, because questioning them doesn't help. And this is one of them. You sit there for a while, letting the quiet settle back into place. The hallway is gone again, closed off behind the heavy wooden door. The shared space you just saw feels distant now, almost like something imagined rather than experienced. But the room is very real, and so is that corner. You don't look at it directly this time. You don't need to, because now you understand something you didn't before. That container isn't temporary, it's part of your routine now. You shift slightly on the bed, your body still adjusting to the unfamiliar weight of this new reality. The air feels unchanged, but your awareness of it has deepened. Every breath feels a little more intentional, because now you know what shares this space with you. You lean forward, resting your elbows on your knees, your gaze drifting slowly across the room, the table, the wall, the floor. And then without really meaning to, you look back toward the chamber pot. This time, you don't look away immediately, because curiosity has replaced hesitation. You study it for a moment. It's simple, unadorned, made of a material that's easy to clean, or at least easier than most things in this room. You notice something else too, a cloth, folded nearby, not perfectly clean, but clearly placed there with intention. You pause, because now another question forms: what happens next? Because using it is only part of the process. There's still something left to do. In many medieval households, chamber pots weren't left indefinitely. They were emptied regularly, sometimes by the person using them, sometimes by servants, and sometimes simply disposed of in nearby streets or designated areas. Historians still argue how organized these routines were, but one detail appears often. It wasn't always handled carefully. You exhale slowly, your mind filling in the gaps, because that means someone has to deal with it. Every time. You glance at the door again. No one is coming. No footsteps. No signs of help. Which means it's probably you. You sit back slightly, letting that realization settle, because this isn't just inconvenient. It's ongoing, a cycle. Use it, empty it, repeat. You stand slowly, your movements more deliberate now, and step toward the corner again. This time, there's less hesitation. Not because you're comfortable, but because you're adapting. You crouch slightly, examining it more closely. There's no lid, no seal, nothing to contain anything beyond its basic shape. Just a vessel, functional, nothing more. You pick it up carefully, your grip firm but cautious. It has weight to it, not excessive, but noticeable. You hold it there for a moment, unsure of your next step. Because while the object is simple, the process isn't. Where do you take it? How far? What's expected? Another strange detail surfaces in your thoughts, one that feels oddly specific again. In some places, people would empty chamber pots directly out of windows into the streets below, often with little warning. A quick shout might come first, or sometimes nothing at all. Historians still argue how common this practice truly was, but the stories appear often enough to feel real. You glance instinctively toward the small window. It's narrow, too narrow, and even if it weren't, you hesitate, because the idea feels abrupt, uncontrolled. You lower the chamber pot slightly, thinking, because this isn't just about following what others might have done. It's about figuring out what works here, in this space, in your situation. You step toward the door again, opening it slowly, the weight of the object reminding you with every movement that this is now part of your routine. The hallway greets you once more. Quiet, still. You step out carefully, holding the pot steady, your movements slower now, more focused, because this feels different, more exposed, more noticeable. Even though no one is around, you walk a short distance, your eyes scanning for any sign, any indication of where this should go. Then you see it. A darker area at the far end of the corridor. Not a room, not enclosed, but designated. You approach slowly, and as you get closer, the purpose becomes clear. This is where it's taken, where everything ends up. You don't linger. You don't examine it closely, because you don't need to. You do what you need to do quickly, carefully, and step back. Then turn and walk back. Your steps are quieter now, more efficient, because you just completed something that felt impossible not long ago, and now it's done. You return to your room, closing the door behind you, the space feeling slightly different again. Not cleaner, not better, but understood. You set the chamber pot back in its place, adjusting the cloth beside it without thinking, restoring the small order that exists here. Then you sit down again. Your body settles more easily this time, because one unknown has been replaced with experience. One question has been answered, and that changes how everything feels. You take a slow breath, then another, your awareness returning to its steady rhythm. Inhale, exhale, and as you sit there, your mind quieter now, your body more adjusted to the routines of this unfamiliar world, you begin to understand something important. What feels unthinkable at first quickly becomes normal, not because it changes, but because you do. The room settles again. You sit where you were before, your posture a little more relaxed now, your breathing steady, your mind quieter than it was when you first woke up. Because something has shifted, not in the space, but in you. The chamber pot sits in the corner again, exactly where it was, as if nothing ever happened. The table remains still. The narrow bed creaks faintly as you adjust your weight. Everything looks the same, but it doesn't feel the same. You notice it first in the air, not immediately, not sharply, just gradually. A faint presence, something that doesn't belong to any one place in the room, but instead spreads evenly through it. You inhale slowly, pause, then exhale. There it is. Not overwhelming, not unbearable, but constant. And now that you've noticed it, you can't quite ignore it. You shift slightly, your body reacting in small ways, adjusting your position, turning your head, as if that might change something. It doesn't, because this isn't something you can move away from. It's part of the environment. In many pre-modern living spaces, ventilation was minimal, especially in smaller rooms or enclosed buildings. Air circulation depended on open windows, doorways, or simple structural gaps, none of which were always effective. Historians still argue how tolerable these conditions were on a daily basis, but one detail remains consistent. Odors lingered. You feel that now, not as a sharp reaction, but as a slow awareness. Because the longer you sit here, the more familiar it becomes. You lean your head back against the wall, closing your eyes briefly, focusing on your breathing again. Inhale, exhale. The scent doesn't disappear, but it softens, or maybe you're just getting used to it. A strange thought drifts through your mind, something almost ironic. The human brain has a way of adapting to constant smells. Given enough time, it begins to filter them out, treating them as background rather than something urgent. Historians still argue how quickly this adaptation happens in environments like this, but the principle is well known. You notice it happening already. The sharpness fades, the edges blur, and what remains is something quieter, still there, but less intrusive. You open your eyes slowly, your gaze drifting across the room again, your movements calmer now, because this is another adjustment, another layer of acceptance. You shift your position slightly, pulling your legs in closer, resting your arms loosely, conserving energy without really thinking about it. The room remains unchanged. The air remains heavy, but your reaction to it has shifted, and that makes all the difference. Another faint sound reaches you, that familiar tap, soft, careful. You respond almost immediately. One tap, a pause, then a reply. Still there, still steady. You don't continue, because the connection doesn't need constant attention, just acknowledgement. You lean your head back again, your breathing slowing further, your body settling deeper into stillness, and for a moment, everything feels almost manageable. Not comfortable, but balanced. The scent is still present, but no longer demanding. The silence is still thick, but no longer overwhelming. The space is still small, but no longer suffocating, because your mind has adjusted just enough to make it bearable. Another quiet realization begins to form, one that feels simple, but important. You can't change the environment, but you can change how you experience it, and that shift is what allows you to stay here, to continue, to endure. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of the bed, feeling the rough texture beneath them, grounding yourself in something physical again, because sensation helps. It gives your mind something to focus on, something real. The drip returns to your awareness, steady, unchanging. You listen to it for a moment, letting it guide your breathing again. Inhale, exhale, matching the rhythm, because rhythm brings structure, and structure brings calm. Even here, even in a place like this, and as you sit there, your senses no longer fighting the environment, your mind no longer resisting what is simply there, you begin to understand something important. The hardest part isn't the discomfort itself, it's the resistance to it. And once that resistance fades, even something like this becomes something you can live with. You sit for a while longer, letting that quiet balance hold. Your breathing is steady now. The room, with all its small discomforts, feels almost predictable. Almost. But eventually, your attention drifts outward again, because staying in one place physically or mentally doesn't last forever. You shift your weight, stand slowly, and move toward the door once more. This time, there's less hesitation, not because the outside has changed, but because you have. You open the door and step into the hallway, the cooler air brushing lightly against your face. It doesn't feel fresh exactly, but compared to the stillness of your room, it's different enough to notice. You begin walking again. Your steps echo softly against the stone, the sound traveling farther than you expect. The corridor stretches ahead, dimly lit, curving slightly as it leads you forward. And then, you notice something. A faint line along the floor, darker than the stone around it. You slow your steps, your gaze dropping to follow it. It runs along the edge of the wall, uneven in places, almost like a trail that's been formed over time. You crouch slightly, examining it, not touching, just observing, because something about it feels important. You stand again and follow it, your curiosity pulling you forward. The line continues, bending with the corridor, disappearing briefly into shadow before reappearing again further along. And as you follow it, the air begins to change. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Heavier, thicker, carrying a scent that's stronger than what you've already experienced. You don't need to think too hard about what it might be, because now, it's becoming clear. In many medieval towns, streets often serve multiple purposes: pathways, marketplaces, and, at times, open drainage systems for waste. Without modern plumbing, disposal methods relied heavily on gravity, distance, and convenience. Historians still argue how structured these systems really were, but most agree they were far from sanitary. You continue walking, your steps slower now, more cautious. The corridor opens slightly, leading you to an exit. A doorway. No door this time. Just an opening. You step through it, and suddenly the space changes completely. You're outside. The light is brighter here, though still muted, filtered through a pale sky. The air moves more freely, carrying a mix of scents that shift as the breeze changes direction. You take a slow breath. It feels different, less confined, but not necessarily cleaner. You look down. The ground is uneven, a mix of dirt, stone, and things you'd rather not identify too closely. That faint line you followed, it continues here, more visible now, wider, and unmistakably part of something larger, a drainage path, or at least what passes for one. You step carefully, avoiding certain areas without needing to think about why. Your instincts guide you, picking paths that feel safer, cleaner, though none of them are perfect. A distant movement catches your attention, someone walking, not rushing, not avoiding anything, just moving through the space as if this is completely normal, because for them, it is. A strange detail surfaces in your thoughts again. In some medieval cities, people would empty chamber pots directly into the streets, sometimes calling out a warning beforehand, something like a brief shout to alert anyone below. Sometimes, not always. Historians still argue how frequently this happened, but the practice is mentioned often enough to feel real. You glance upward instinctively. The buildings rise on either side, narrow and close together, their upper levels leaning slightly inward, as if they're watching the street below. Windows. Open. Unpredictable. You take a small step back, just in case, because now you understand something new. The environment isn't just around you, it's above you too. You continue walking, your movements more deliberate now, your awareness expanded. Every step requires attention, every path a small decision. Because this isn't just a street, it's a system. An unstructured, constantly shifting system where everything flows. Somewhere. You pause for a moment looking around. The space is alive in a quiet, steady way. Not chaotic, but not controlled either. People move, air shifts, and everything blends together into a kind of balance that feels fragile, that's somehow stable. You turn slowly, taking it all in. Because this is part of daily life here. Not hidden, not separate, integrated. And as you stand there, your senses adjusting once again, your expectations shifting just a little further, you begin to understand something important. The idea of clean isn't universal. It's shaped by what's possible, by what's available, by what people are used to. And here, this is normal. This is how things are done. You take one last look around, then turn back toward the doorway, stepping inside again, leaving the open air behind. The corridor greets you once more. Cool, dim, familiar now. You walk back slowly, retracing your steps, your mind quieter than before. Because each new experience adds something, not comfort, but understanding. And understanding makes everything just a little easier to handle. You step back inside, and almost immediately, the air changes again. The outside world fades behind you, along with its shifting breeze and open space. Here, the corridor feels enclosed, steady, and somehow more predictable, even with everything you've already learned about it. Your footsteps slow, not out of caution this time, but because your body is beginning to conserve energy without you telling it to. You walk back toward your room, but something in your mind lingers on what you just saw outside. That narrow street, that slow, uneven flow along the ground. The way everything seemed to move, without really being controlled. And then you remember something else. Castles. You haven't seen one here, not directly, but you've heard of them, imagined them. Massive stone walls, towering structures, symbols of power and protection. And yet, even they have to deal with the same problem. Waste. In many medieval castles, there were structures called garderobes, small, enclosed spaces built into the walls, often extending outward, with a vertical shaft that allowed waste to drop down below. Simple, effective in a basic sense, but not exactly clean. Historians still argue how advanced these systems really were, but one detail appears again and again. They relied on gravity more than anything else. You slow your steps, picturing it. A stone seat, a narrow opening, and below, just a drop. No pipes, no flushing, just distance. You imagine yourself there for a moment, sitting in a cold stone space, elevated above the ground, knowing that whatever you leave behind doesn't disappear, it just moves somewhere else, out of sight, but not truly gone. You exhale slowly, your breath visible for just a moment in the cooler air. Because now, something becomes clear. It doesn't matter if you're in a small room like yours, or a massive castle. The problem is the same, only the method changes. You reach your door and push it open gently. Stepping back inside, the room feels familiar again, not comfortable, but known. And that familiarity brings a kind of quiet stability. You sit down on the bed, your body lowering slowly, your muscles relaxing into the position with less resistance than before. Because you've already adjusted, at least a little, you lean back, your head resting lightly against the wall, your eyes drifting closed for a moment. And that's when your mind begins to wander again. Not outward this time, but inward. You think about the systems you've just imagined, the garderobes, the streets, the chamber pots, different solutions to the same basic need, some more structured, some more improvised. A strange, almost amusing thought crosses your mind. Even in castles, places associated with wealth and power, these systems weren't perfect. In fact, some accounts suggest that the areas beneath garderobes could become quite unpleasant over time, requiring periodic cleaning, or simply being avoided altogether. Historians still argue how often these areas were maintained, but the idea itself is telling. Even the most powerful people live with this. You open your eyes again, your gaze settling on the corner of your room. The chamber pot sits quietly where you left it, unchanged, unremarkable, and yet connected to everything you've just thought about, because it's part of the same system, just on a smaller scale. You shift slightly, adjusting your position, your body settling more comfortably into the bed than it did earlier. The roughness hasn't changed, but your tolerance has. You take a slow breath. Inhale. Exhale. The air still carries that faint, lingering presence, but it no longer feels surprising. Just there. Another faint tap reaches you. You respond. A pause. A reply. Still there. Still steady. You don't continue, because the connection doesn't need constant attention, just awareness. You lean your head back again, your breathing slowing further, your body relaxing into stillness. And your thoughts begin to settle into something quieter, more reflective. Because now, you're not just reacting to this world, you're understanding it, piece by piece, system by system. You realize something important. This isn't chaos. It might look like it. It might feel like it. But it's actually a kind of order. Just not the kind you're used to. It's a system built on simplicity, on necessity, on making do with what's available. And while it's far from perfect, it works. Well enough. For the people who live within it, you run your fingers lightly along the edge of the bed again, grounding yourself in the present, feeling the texture beneath your touch. Because even as your thoughts expand, your body remains here, in this room, in this moment. And as you sit there, your awareness steady, your mind calmer, your understanding deeper. You begin to understand something important. You don't need perfection to survive. You just need something that works, even if it's simple, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's nothing like what you're used to. Because in the end, adaptation matters more than comfort. You stay seated for a while, letting that thought settle. Adaptation over comfort. It sounds simple when you think about it slowly, like this, when nothing is rushing you, when the room is still, when your breathing has found its quiet rhythm again. But then your mind drifts back to something else, not the systems, not the rooms, but the people. Because all of this, the chamber pots, the streets, the garderobes, that only exists because someone is dealing with what comes after, and suddenly that part feels more real. You sit up slightly, your posture shifting as your attention sharpens just a little. Because earlier you carried the chamber pot yourself. You walked it down the corridor. You found that darker space. You handled it. But what if you didn't? What if someone else did? In many medieval towns and cities, there were individuals whose work involved handling human waste, cleaning latrines, emptying cesspits, and maintaining whatever sanitation systems existed at the time. They had different names depending on the place, but one thing stayed the same. Their work was essential. Historians still argue how organized these roles were, but records suggest they were often among the least desirable occupations, yet absolutely necessary for daily life. You lean forward slightly, resting your elbows on your knees again, your mind building the picture. Someone walking these same corridors, carrying what others leave behind. Day after day, not once, not occasionally, but constantly, a strange kind of respect begins to form. Quiet, unspoken, because this isn't something people choose lightly, it's something they do because it needs to be done. You glance toward the corner again. The chamber pot sits there still, waiting for its next use. And now, it doesn't just represent inconvenience, it represents a chain of actions. A system that relies on people as much as it relies on objects. You lean back again, your head resting against the wall, your eyes half closed. Because your thoughts are slowing again, settling into that steady rhythm. Inhale. Exhale. A faint tap reaches you. You respond. A pause. A reply. Still there. And for a moment, you imagine them too. The presence beyond your wall, not just sitting, not just enduring, but living within the same system, facing the same routines, making the same adjustments. You don't know who they are, but you understand them, at least a little. Another thought drifts in, softer this time. In some places, waste collectors would work at night, moving quietly through streets or buildings, removing what had accumulated during the day. It was practical, less disruptive, less visible. Historians still argue how widespread this practice was, but the idea fits the pattern you've begun to see. Things happen here, even when you don't see them. You shift slightly, your body moving with less effort now. Your movement smoother, more efficient, because you're adapting, not just physically, but mentally. You're no longer reacting to every detail, you're observing, understanding, accepting. The air remains the same, the faint scent still lingers, the room hasn't changed, but your relationship with it has, and that changes everything. You run your hand lightly across the bed again, feeling its rough surface, grounding yourself in something tangible. Because grounding helps. It keeps your thoughts from drifting too far, keeps you present. Another quiet realization forms. This world isn't designed for comfort, it's designed for function. Every object, every routine, every role, it all exists to keep things moving, even if it's not pleasant, even if it's not ideal, it works, and that's enough. You take another slow breath, your chest rising and falling in that steady rhythm. Inhale, exhale. The drip returns faintly in the distance, blending with the silence, becoming part of the background once again. Everything is steady, everything is predictable, and for a moment, that feels almost calming. You lean your head back fully now, your eyes closing, your thoughts softening at the edges, because there's nothing new demanding your attention. Nothing urgent, just the quiet continuation of everything you've already begun to understand. And as you sit there, your mind no longer resisting the reality of this place, your awareness balanced between observation and acceptance, you begin to understand something important. Every system, no matter how simple, depends on people, on routines, on repetition. And even the most uncomfortable parts of life become manageable when they're shared, even if that sharing is silent, even if it's unseen, even if it's something no one really wants to think about. Because here, it's part of everything. Your eyes stay closed for a moment longer, not because you were tired exactly, but because everything feels quieter that way. Your breathing settles into that slow, steady rhythm again, the kind that doesn't ask for attention. It just continues on its own, gentle and reliable, even in a place like this. Inhale, exhale. But eventually, your awareness shifts again, because there's something else you haven't thought about yet, something smaller, but just as important. You open your eyes slowly, your gaze drifting toward the small cloth near the corner. You noticed it before, you didn't think much of it, but now it matters, because once the act itself is done, once the chamber pot has been used, once it's been emptied, there's still one question left. How do you clean yourself? You sit up slightly, your posture straightening just enough to bring your focus back into the room, because this isn't something you can ignore. It's part of the same routine, the same system, and now you have to understand it. In many parts of the medieval world, toilet paper didn't exist in the way you know it today. Instead, people used whatever materials were available: cloth, leaves, straw, moss, or even water, depending on location and resources. Historians still argue which methods were most common, but one thing is clear: there was no single standard. You look again at the cloth. It's simple, reusable, not perfectly clean, but not completely neglected either. And suddenly, its purpose feels obvious. You hesitate, because this is another adjustment, another shift in expectation. But this one feels more personal, more direct. You reach toward it slowly, your fingers brushing against the fabric. It's rough, worn from repeated use. You pause for a moment, your mind catching up with what your hand has already confirmed. Because this isn't disposable, it's part of a cycle. Used, cleaned, used again. A strange, almost distant thought crosses your mind, something oddly practical. In some historical accounts, people would rinse cloths or materials in water and reuse them, relying on basic washing methods rather than disposal. Historians still argue how effective these methods were, but the idea fits with everything else you've seen. Nothing here is wasted, everything is reused. You set the cloth back down gently, your hand retreating slowly, because this isn't just about the object. It's about the mindset, the understanding that resources are limited, that convenience doesn't exist, that everything serves a purpose beyond a single use. You lean back again, your body settling into the bed, your movements slower, more thoughtful, because this is another layer of adaptation. Not just accepting discomfort, but accepting repetition. You glance toward the small window again, that faint line of light still cutting through the dimness. It hasn't changed, just like everything else. Steady, unmoving, reliable in its own quiet way. Another faint tap reaches you. You respond. A pause. A reply. Still there, still present, and for a moment you imagine them going through the same process, the same routine, the same adjustments. Not because they want to, but because they have to. You don't know who they are, but you know this part of their day is no different from yours. That shared understanding settles quietly between you, even without words. You shift slightly, pulling your legs in closer, your body instinctively conserving warmth, conserving energy. Because everything here asks you to use less, less movement, less effort, less expectation. You take another slow breath. Inhale. Exhale. The air still carries that faint, familiar scent, but now it's just part of the background. Your mind no longer focuses on it, because it has something else to process, something more immediate, more personal. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of the bed again, grounding yourself, reminding yourself that you're here, that this is real, that this is happening. And as you sit there, your awareness steady, your thoughts moving slowly, your understanding expanding one small piece at a time, you begin to understand something important. Cleanliness isn't just about tools, it's about habits, about routines, about making the best of what you have, even when what you have is far from ideal. And here, that's exactly what people do, every single day. You remain still for a while, your fingers resting lightly against the edge of the bed, your breathing slow and steady. Inhale. Exhale. The rhythm holds you in place, keeping everything calm, manageable, almost quiet enough to forget. Almost. But then something shifts again. Not in the room, not in the objects around you, but in your awareness of something you haven't fully considered yet. Water. You glance toward the small window again, that narrow line of light still cutting through the dimness, unchanged. Because outside, somewhere beyond these walls, there has to be water, and suddenly that thought feels more important than it should. Because everything you've seen so far, the streets, the chamber pots, the drainage paths, it all leads somewhere, and that somewhere has consequences. You sit up slightly, your posture straightening as your thoughts sharpen just a little. Because now, you're connecting things, the waste that leaves your room, the waste that moves through the streets, the waste that gathers in certain places. It doesn't just disappear, it goes somewhere. And in many medieval towns, that somewhere was often dangerously close to everyday life. Waste could seep into the ground, flow into nearby waterways, or collect in areas that weren't far from where people lived, cooked, and gathered water. Historians still argue how much people understood these connections at the time, but the results were clear. Water wasn't always safe. You swallow slowly, your throat suddenly feeling a little drier than before. Because now, your mind moves to something very simple, very basic, drinking. You haven't thought about it yet, but now, you can't ignore it. Because if water isn't clean, then everything becomes harder. You stand slowly, your movements careful, and walk toward the door again. This time, there's no hesitation, just curiosity. You step into the hallway, then continue forward, following the same path you took before. Your footsteps echo softly, your body moving with a kind of quiet efficiency now. Because you've done this once already. You know the way. The corridor opens, the doorway appears, and once again, you step outside. The air greets you with that same faint movement, shifting gently across your skin. You take a slow breath, then look around, because now, you're searching for something specific. Water. You walk slowly, your eyes scanning the surroundings, your attention focused, and then you see it. Not a clear stream, not a flowing river, but a source, a well, simple, uncovered, positioned in a place that's easy to reach. You approach it carefully, your steps measured, because now you're aware of something you weren't before, that this water might not be as clean as it looks. A strange detail surfaces in your thoughts again. In some historical accounts, wells were placed close to living areas for convenience, but that also meant they were sometimes affected by nearby waste, especially if drainage systems were poor or inconsistent. Historians still argue how often this contamination occurred, but the risk was always there. You stop a short distance away, looking down into the well. The water reflects faint light, still and quiet. It looks normal, almost inviting. But now, you know better. Because what you've seen, what you've understood, changes how you see it. You don't reach for it. You don't interact with it. You just observe. Because sometimes, understanding is enough. You step back slowly, turning your gaze away, your thoughts settling into something quieter again. Because this is another layer, another realization. That survival here isn't just about managing what's visible. It's about understanding what isn't. The hidden connections, the unseen consequences. You turn and begin walking back, your steps steady, your mind calmer now that the question has been answered. Because now you know. Water isn't guaranteed to be safe. Cleanliness isn't guaranteed to exist. Everything requires awareness, attention, care. You step back into the corridor, then into your room, closing the door gently behind you. The familiar space surrounds you again, still, quiet, unchanged. But your understanding has grown. You sit down once more, your body settling into the same position, your breathing returning to its steady rhythm. Inhale, exhale. And as you sit there, your thoughts no longer racing, your awareness balanced between what you've seen and what you now know, you begin to understand something important. Survival isn't just about avoiding discomfort. It's about recognizing risks, even the ones you can't see, even the ones that look harmless, because here, nothing is as simple as it seems. You settle back into the room again, your body lowering into a position that now feels almost familiar, not comfortable, but known. And that difference matters. Your breathing slows, your shoulders relax, and for a moment, everything feels steady again. The same walls, the same dim light, the same quiet air that carries just enough weight to remind you where you are. Inhale, exhale. But now, your thoughts don't stay still for long, because everything you've seen, the streets, the water, the routines, it all points to something larger, something you can't ignore anymore. What happens when things go wrong? You lean your head back against the wall, your eyes drifting closed again, your mind slowly tracing the connections. Waste, water, air, close together, constantly interacting, and suddenly the picture becomes clearer. In many medieval cities, poor sanitation played a significant role in the spread of disease. Without proper systems to separate waste from living spaces, illnesses could move quietly through populations, often without anyone fully understanding why. Historians still argue how much people knew about these causes at the time, but the effects were undeniable. Outbreaks happened. You open your eyes slowly, your gaze settling somewhere unfocused in front of you, because this isn't something you can see directly, not like the chamber pot, not like the street. It's something that moves beneath the surface, invisible, but real. You shift slightly, your body adjusting, your awareness sharpening just a little, because now you're thinking about something deeper, not just discomfort, not just inconvenience, but risk. A strange, quiet thought drifts through your mind, something that feels both distant and immediate. In times of widespread illness, people often relied on simple ideas to explain what was happening: bad air, imbalance, unseen forces. Historians still argue how these beliefs shaped behavior, but one thing is clear: people tried to make sense of what they couldn't see. You sit there for a moment, letting that idea settle, because it makes sense. When you can't see the cause, you create one. You adjust your position slightly, your movements slower now, your body conserving energy without effort. The air feels the same, but now it carries a different meaning. Not just discomfort, but possibility. You take a slow breath, then another, because breathing is constant, unavoidable. And now, you're aware of it in a different way, more carefully, more consciously. Another faint tap reaches you, you respond, a pause, a reply, still there, still steady. And for a moment, you wonder, have they thought about this too? Have they connected the same things, the same risks? You don't know, but the thought lingers briefly before fading again. Because here, your focus always returns inward, to what you can control, to what you can manage. You run your fingers lightly along the wall beside you, feeling the cool stone beneath your touch, solid, unchanging, grounding. Because when things feel uncertain, you look for what isn't. You lean your head back again, your eyes half closed, your thoughts slowing. Because there's nothing immediate you can do about this, no system to fix, no solution to implement. Just awareness. And awareness here becomes its own kind of protection. You shift slightly, pulling your legs closer, your body instinctively conserving warmth, conserving energy. The drip returns faintly in the distance, steady, unchanging, a quiet reminder that time is still moving, even if you can't measure it. And as you sit there, your mind no longer racing ahead, your thoughts settling into a slower rhythm. Your awareness balancing between what you know and what you can't fully understand, you begin to understand something important. Not every danger is visible. Not every risk announces itself. Some things move quietly, slowly, unnoticed. And surviving here isn't just about enduring what you can see. It's about respecting what you can't. Because sometimes that's where the real challenge lies. The room feels quieter now. Not because anything has changed, but because your mind is slowed enough to match it. You sit with your back against the wall, your brayer